Welcome to day 2 of EclipseCon 2021. I had a great time yesterday. I attended a lot of great talks. I learned a lot. I hope you did too. EclipseCon is just a great event and certainly the highlight of my year. Let's give a big thank you to all of our sponsors who enable us to make this conference a great experience for you. Please do visit with our sponsors by clicking the exhibitors link in the swap card interface to check out their resources, product videos, and more. Please take a few minutes to learn what they have to offer. You can start a conversation with our sponsors using the Talk With window in their booth. Of course, we need you to evaluate the sessions, please. To rate a session, you must be registered for it in SwapCard before the talk starts. So please do join the session before it starts. Your evaluation of the sessions provides us with valuable information that helps us make the conference even better. Yesterday, we announced a new top-level project and working group, both named Oniro. Please join talks in room 5 to learn more. The exhibitors, again, please do visit the exhibitors. Click on the exhibitors button in the interface. Please do also attend our wellness session. Take a few minutes to stretch with desk yoga. And of course, Wednesday night at EclipseCon is all about social networking. We continue the tradition of gathering on Wednesday evenings at 1800, but we'll be doing it using Wonder Me. Please join us. The link is in the conference agenda. Our Birds of a Feather session start at 18:15. And of course, all of our talks will be posted after the event is over, both in the SwapCard platform and on the Eclipse Foundation's YouTube channel. So please look for the talks you may have missed there. I'm pleased to introduce today's keynote panel. Open source has eaten the world in fostering collaboration to fix technical problems. In our keynote panel, our panelists call on open source for fighting planned obsolescence, reducing the environmental cost of technology, and for making the world better. The keynote panel will start after some short videos from our sponsors.
Hi everyone, Arcad is a global technology company highly specialized in the release orchestrations. We have a tool called Drops that will allow you to centralize all your deployment activity while securing this critical phase. Join us for the Eclipse event and we'll show you our expertise in there.
Hello everyone and welcome to Eclipse 2021 Con. It is great to have you here. Very excited about the panel today, Open Source for Great Good, pretty much. I am Richard Littauer. I'm here on behalf of Sustain, sustainoss.org, and oswaldplus.com, two organizations dedicated towards figuring out how do we make the world a more sustainable and how to make collaboration more possible using open source, which is the best. I will do very little talking, I hope, during this panel, because we have 3 other people here who are much more knowledgeable and have much more to say, I hope, than I do. Just so you know who they are, we're going to do brief introductions. So I'm going to ask you 3 to do 2 minutes. I know some people like to talk. 30 seconds is okay, but maybe 2 minutes is better. And so going forward, Agnès Crépé, could you please introduce yourself and say what you do?
Yeah, so thanks a lot for the invitation. I'm super proud to be part of this panel. So yes, I'm Agnès Crépé. I work at Fairphone. I've been working here for the last 3 years. I'm a software engineer and I'm leading the software longevity team, who is fighting more or less software obsolescence. And Fairphone is a Dutch company who is trying to make a fun to change the norms in the industry. So the phone is sustainable, built with fair materials, without conflict minerals, etc. But from an engineering point of view, the phone is modular. You can open it, you can change the camera when it is broken, etc. And from a software perspective, we are doing software support for 5, 6, or 7 years, which is a big challenge. We will speak about that later. And to do that, we are using open source. So I will speak about that today.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And I, again, apologize, everyone. My French accent is horrible, so I may mispronounce names at times. Thank you for bearing with me.
That's fine,
Margot.
Richard.
Merci. Margot, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, well, hi, everyone, and thanks for having me as well. So I'm Margot. I work at Latitude, which is a 4 years old now NGO, and we define ourselves as a community of tech actors trying to build more meaningful and responsible technologies. That is, technologies that help solve social and environmental challenges that we're facing, and also technologies that take into account their environmental costs, the impact that they're going to have on the users. In short, how do we do our daily jobs more ethically? And to do so, what do we do in our everyday actions? We have two main programs. The first one is that we run teaching programs in universities, so in engineering and computer science universities, to help students leverage their technological skills to work on projects brought by NGOs. So for instance, how can you do a data mining project for a food bank? Or how can you develop a platform for a structure trying to build links between homeless people and the people living in the same environment? So that's the first thing we do. And we run the program for around 6,000 students each year. And the second program that we have is a big community that gathers now around 3,000 individuals and 50 organizations. And we help these people understand what are the social and environmental challenges of technology and how can they work in their everyday job to help address these issues. And my connection, I guess I'd say, to open source is that we really view open source as a first step to reinventing tech culture as a whole. And I hope we're going to get to touch a bit more upon that.
We will. Thank you so much. Sounds like you're doing a lot of work with a lot of people, very, very large communities there. Christian Perino, you also know about large communities as you are part of Open UK, which is all of the UK. Can you describe what you do there?
Sure, I'm their Chief Sustainability Officer. So Open UK is a nonprofit, unsurprisingly based in the UK, that works on promoting the use of open technology across business, academia, and government. In my role, it's primarily about promoting the use of open technology and open principles as well as a key enabler toward across the Sustainable Development Goals. If you think that the level of systemic change required to enable and achieve the Sustainable Development Goals in a short period of time, I think open source principles of collaboration, decentralization, of the creation of collective equity, transparency, circularity, accessibility, these are absolutely essential, and they just happen to be open source's core attributes. One of the first projects that we've taken on is in the world of data centers. Now, data centers are the backbone of an industry that today, according to the SHIFT project, represents around 4% of global GHG emissions. And those are meant to double by just 2025 to 8%. So clearly, this is an industry going in the wrong direction. So our area of focus right now is on building what we're calling the blueprint for the carbon negative data center of the future, which we're doing with an international consortium of organizations that bring expertise in the many different areas of a blueprint that requires specification. What we're trying to achieve is a model that brings to 80% decarbonization and 90% dematerialization in the data center.
Excellent. Thank you so much for explaining that. It sounds like a great project. So we have 3 different companies here doing 3 different things. One of them focused more on recycling. How do we make sure that we don't waste what we have already? One of them focused on how to make sure that the things we do in the future are better with data centers. And another focused on what are we doing in communities and systemically as a whole to ensure that we have more sustainable practices. Now, sustain means a lot of different things. And we just referred to the sustainable goals. from Open UK. Thank you, Christian, which is really interesting. That's one way of looking at it. It's also maybe making sure that tech continues, or maybe making sure that things are more sustainable. Margot, my question for you is, how do we make sure that we change society as a whole? You mentioned societal changes in general, but systemically, how do we change tech when society itself also needs to be changed? That may not have been phrased as well as I could have phrased it, but hopefully you got the idea.
Yeah, well, I guess one way of seeing at it is, how can we aim at having a systemic impact in changing tech in the long run? And to do so, I'd say that the first main point is addressing all of the actors that are affected by the changing tech culture required. So that is, how do we address the individual level? And that's what we do at Latitude. We really believe that individuals are the one that can make a change. But if you're only helping, students and employees change their practices, but you're not addressing the company level or the policy level, well, that's one problematic. So I guess one of the answers would be, how do you address all of the levels and all of the areas of society to change tech as a whole, and not only address a small part of the problem?
Agnes, I know that with Fairphone, you're interested in also changing the individual level with how we treat our phones individually, but also systemically how we deal with phones in general. Can you talk a bit more about how Fairphone does that?
Yeah, indeed, because we don't want to do a wonderful phone, which could be different from the industry. We want to change the industry. So we want to influence the partners and also the individuals. So the individuals, because we are pushing for changing the usage. We are pushing people to keep their phone longer, but we are also pushing people to be involved in some open source community that we have. And for the partners, of course, if we look at our competitors like Samsung, Apple, etc., we would like them to do the same. So to build, to propose a phone in the industry with long-term support, with long-term warranty, this kind of thing. And coming back on the open source aspect, we are trying to invite all of our users to join us in this journey. So meaning, for example, that for the software sides, we are asking people to test the phone. We have some beta testers program to invite people to test the phones before we roll out a new software release. And of course, we are also asking people to develop some part of the software, because we cannot build a long-lasting software on a mobile phone if you don't have any open source ecosystem. So we are also relying on the community like Linear Edge, etc. So fighting software obsolescence means also that you have to rely on open source. So you have to do the nurturing of this open source community, which is quite interesting. And we don't have to say that the open source members are only developers. You can be an open source member doing the testing step. And trust me, testing a phone is not easy. You always have a lot of things to do. So this is what we are trying to do, to break a bit the borders between the users and the manufacturers. We would like people to build together a new phone.
I like that a lot. I like that it's not just for individuals and not just for one side, but basically for the entire picture. Christian, with your open database models and or open data center plans, it seems to be much more focused at sort of one aspect. Can you talk about how open data plans doesn't just work for, say, changing the grid, but also for all levels of the open source ecosystem?
Yeah, I'll answer in a couple of ways that may get sporadic very quickly, so apologies in advance for that. I think if you look at it at the highest level possible, unless you're changing the goalpost from measuring success in terms of perpetual growth to measuring success in terms of the health and well-being of all people and the planet, which also known as prosperity, everything that we're doing is patchwork. Positive patchwork, but patchwork. When I dive deep into the data center, that's just one manifestation of many things that need to be done. Open UK is a small organization, but it's already doing sustainability work at kids coding education level and matching that with sustainability. So early education, moving a step up, and doing work around opening data in the energy sector, to obviously the data center project that we're talking about here more in detail. The data center project in itself, if people think of greening a data center, the first thought is, well, let's power them with renewable energy. Well, that's a small fraction of the solution, right? You have to look at buildings and how buildings are being built. Are you doing it by drawing new materials, or are you refurbishing existing buildings? The energy aspect of it as well is that, are you sourcing renewable energy, but also in the interim, because that transition isn't as snappy as we would all want it. What are you doing to capture carbon? What are you doing with, for example, the operational side to use less energy? What are you doing with the excess heat that a data center can produce? Are you integrating it back into the local grid so marginalized communities can have cheaper energy, for example? So, there's a system, and those are just two pillars. What are you doing at the regulatory environment? Because one thing is about greening your own facility, but over 90% of emissions come from the supply chain. So there has to be some regulatory intervention to ensure there's transparency across supply chains, and where governments themselves are also powering the data centers with that same level of transparency and requirements. So, and I haven't even touched on the hardware and software level. So, hardware and software, which are a major component in any data center. Imagine the role of open source to enable a circular model there, where organizations at the local level can, repair hardware. They can reuse hardware. They can upcycle hardware, essentially extending the lifetime and having to draw out new materials in a data center's life cycle. So even that small little narrow project is a systemic change that requires an incredible breadth of expertise across multiple categories.
And may I ask you, Christian, if I may, why you did choose the data center use case? I mean, as you said, Open UK is doing a lot of things, but why you decided to be focused on the data center?
I guess for two reasons. The first one is the outrageous negative impact that it's having on the planet. So 4% global GHG emissions to 8% is not insignificant. And that's a very short period of time to see a number double and in the wrong direction. The second reason is because of Open UK's existing relationships. So it was the fastest path to have an impact. I think the combination of those two things, big possible impact with ability to have an impact in a short period of time, are two reasons. I'm sure there's others, but I think those as a clear driver were obvious ones to us.
Yeah, that's funny. That's more or less the same for Fairphone, indeed. We have choosing to this smartphone focus, just because this is where it was easier for us to have an impact, and because of the huge impact of this industry, the smartphone industry. Interesting. Thanks, Christian.
You're welcome. I mean, I'll add one more thing to it, is if you think of the breadth of that type of implementation, we have to bring in regulatory environment, energy sector, telecom sector, networking sectors, operational building companies. So the breadth of in the cross industry to bring together in an open environment is also, while small, an interesting model to take on to have immediate impact.
It's so interesting. I was also going to ask, do you believe that, tackling in the first place digital sobriety is going to help address all of the other challenges that technologies are facing? For instance, questions about human well-being and how technologies are alienating people, or questions of accessibility of the digital technologies. Do you think that's the first component on which we should start?
I think it's a component. To me, unless you face reality and tackle what I said at the beginning, if you're doing things and your goal remains perpetual growth, you're not sustainable. You're not even aspiring to be sustainable. Chances are you're actually doing things that look great to continue doing what you're doing, which certainly isn't sustainable. So I think quick wins, short wins that have a big impact are absolutely the right way to start, as long as you don't lose track of the bigger picture and the thing that you actually have to change. The definition of success.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I think we'd also say, just exactly building upon what you were saying about having to build something that's going to be sustainable. It's also about, addressing the models of governance, for instance, of the technological companies that are producing most of the digital devices that we're using today. And I guess that's another side that you have to tackle, which is not the one that you're touching upon. So
I mean, with a data center, there's one of the 6 major components is the regulatory environment. So it is, but obviously it's narrowed down and focused down into that. But the attributes of that vertical is all about creating transparency. So opening up, open data, for example, and open software have a huge role to play in enabling transparency. In this narrow case for data centers, but that goes across any sustainable development goal.
Yeah,
You
and
want to be able to
especially
measure impact and measure progress. You need open software and open data to be the foundation.
and especially on the hardware side. I mean, you are speaking about data center. I'm speaking about smartphone. From an hardware perspective, the open source is not here yet. This is where we have to fight the norms, where everything is closed with a lot of patents, etc. And where you have a lot of norms which are not facilitating the sustainability aspect. So yeah, indeed.
One of the questions I have looking at the 3 of you is, who are we missing from this panel? We just mentioned other verticals, like regulatory models. So we could obviously have a regulatory policy advisor here sitting in some 5th square over there. But who else would be good to have here? What other industries are part of the sustain question, do you think? Open to anyone. Margot, how about you?
Annoyingly generic. I'm going to jump in with an annoyingly generic answer. I mean, if we stick with the line that open technology has a role to play across the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which are wide-ranging, there's really, there's nobody that should be excluded. Now, if you involve everyone in a conversation, then all of a sudden you're talking about, solving poverty here and social inequality there, and tech for good here, and and climate change there, and sustainable cities and communities here. So I think having a group that's so tightly connected, as we've serendipitously discovered, between Agnes, Margot, and I, that are solving adjacent problems, makes it easy almost to achieve progress. But so that's probably the worst possible answer you were expecting. But to me, at the same time, you can have everyone, because all of a sudden we're all connected. All of these sustainable development goals are connected. But if we look at it in such a focused way, which is mainly in the the telecom sector, the networking and telecom sector, I think we have a great representation. Not to pat ourselves in the back.
Yeah, I guess we could probably also have people that are more tied to, how about teaching people that are gonna be the ones that are gonna develop the technologies that we're gonna use. Like I am a small part of the representation, but I guess as a broader range, policy experts that are not working on the regulatory means, but more on how do you change programs, how do you change the way technology is taught, and how do you ensure that each student that studies in computer science has to work on an open source project, for instance, to graduate. What are all of the little means that you can insert into a curriculum to ensure that all of the students that are going to be developing the technologies that we use every day have this level of understanding of the, what's the systemic problem and how can I act as an actor of the tech sector?
Yeah, and perhaps on my side, and I'm speaking about my own industry, electronics, smartphone industry, we are trying at Fairphone to involve more legal experts, because when it comes to open source, a lot of things which are not open source by default, you are facing the patents, limits, etc. So yeah, we are trying to rely on more legal advisors, legal lobbyists, I would say, to change the norms from a legal perspective. Because, for example, fighting software obsolescence in the mobile industry means that you have to develop some software layers between the chipsets and Android, if I take the Android ecosystem. So that means that if I skip Android, because Android is mostly open source, but look at the chipset itself, it means that you have to speak with two or three monopoly, Qualcomm, MediaTek. And it's not easy because, of course, their business model is not completely compatible with the long-term support and sustainable electronics devices, etc. So, having people knowing properly how we can make a contract in a different way, giving a big place to the open source is quite important for the future of the open source software in general to make sustainable devices.
So Agnes and Margot have inspired a different read on the question for me. I mean, if I reapply the same question to what it takes, who did we need to bring to the table to develop a carbon negative data center blueprint? That includes, construction companies, hardware companies, software companies, telecoms architecture companies, networking companies, regulatory bodies, city councils, transportation fleet companies, energy companies. So, I mean, and guess what? That's just what happens when you're trying to change the system. You're going to have to bring an incredibly broad set of participants to even have the expertise on the table.
I like those answers. Because it was a broad question, you were able to interpret it however you wanted. That was intentional. Going forward, I guess I would like to go off one of the things that Christian mentioned about not just having a growth mindset. Sustainable can mean that we are able to maintain the same level, but also for some things, for instance, biodiversity, we need to start, going less and doing less damage to the environment in the future. And so degrowth is often a name given to this philosophical movement of not having a growth mindset. But degrowth is also a very bad buzzword when you're talking to, say, corporate people who are more interested in, say, growing their portfolios. So my question here isn't how do we debate degrowth at the Eclipse keynote, because that would be a weird question, but rather, how is degrowth relevant to open source sustainability? How do we make open source compatible with a mindset where we try to actually narrow down what we're working on so that we work on things that really matter in the future? Christian, I already know you have a good answer for this one with your data centers. That's great. So Agnes, can you talk a bit about how many phones there are right now in the ecosystem and how we can move towards a world where we have, say, less phones, or how open source is important there?
Yeah, I mean, roughly we have 1.5 billion phones sold worldwide every year, and the average usage of a phone is less than 2 years. And everything results, this kind of thing results is one of the fastest growing stream of waste in the planet, more than 50 millions of tons of e-waste per year, which is huge. So of course we have to go to the degrowth aspect, but to do that, what we try to do, as I said, is to build long-lasting phone. I mean, you can roll out a phone every 2 years, but it doesn't mean that you don't have to support your phone longer, 5, 6, or 7 years, because the key thing to make sure that you can reduce e-waste is to make sustainable device. And I think open source is needed, as I said, because even if you can repair your phone, for the software support, it is completely needed to have the open source ecosystem. So to change this industry, to have this degrowth approach, you need the open source community.
And just to add on the question, I think that indeed degrowth can be a bit scary when we talk about it, but the question is just looking at how do we measure growth today? We measure growth through what, like GDP per capita, and I think the main question is how are we going to measure growth tomorrow? So maybe degrowth means stop looking at those indicators and add different indicators, add social indicators, add environmental indicators, add transparency indicators, for instance, about what you were talking about, Christian. So I think it can, I mean, just looking at it from this perspective definitely helps like calm down everyone that goes crazy with these words of degrowth and actually addressing the real problem rather than like which way should the curve go.
Thank you so much. I really love that answer, and I look forward to thinking about growth in terms of well-being and mindset and transparency of code and transparency of participants and more people getting involved with open source in general. We are running up on time. So if you would like, I would like to ask you for 30 seconds to a minute of final thoughts on this topic and how you're working towards sustainability in the future, open source for good. Since we started with, the last question was there, how about Christian, go with you. What are your final thoughts on this topic that you'd like to wrap up?
I think the short version is, whether you're looking at achieving sustainability through circularity, whether you're looking at achieving it through transparency, whether you're looking at achieving it through decarbonization, through dematerialization, or shifting gears towards making things work for the societies and the communities around you, eliminating inequality. If you're not doing that with a mindset of open principles, the collaboration, the collective equity, the accessibility, the transparency, and you're not using it, and you're not using open technology, which is clear enablers for all of those things, I think you're missing a fundamental trick.
Excellent answer. Thank you so much. Agnes?
Yeah, so if I look at the Fairphone example, yeah, it all started with a spark of inspired optimism 10 years ago. We were thinking that we could change the electronic industry for the better by becoming part of it, so building a fund ourselves. But it was not doable to do it without the community, without the users involved, and without redefining what is open source in the mobile industry. So yeah, I do see a path for reinventing the mobile industry thanks to open source, but I do see also a path to build technology in a different way. When I was explaining earlier that we can involve the users on testing the fund, etc., we are breaking the borders between users and manufacturers, and I think open source could help on that.
Thank you very much. And Margot?
Well, I guess to wrap up, I think that the main question here is, and that's what you were saying, Agnes, but how do we bring into that optimism? How do we invent new imaginaries for what technology should be geared at? And to do so, we need to hear relevant stories. We need to hear people that started doing that changed the way that they did their everyday jobs. And I think that the open source community has already had a massive impact on the transparency level. And what I would like to say is you should, get out there, be advocates for what you're doing in your everyday job, because that's by bringing this new spark, by showing what should technology be and what are the new imaginaries that you're going to get other people to move alongside with you. So I think that I'm pretty impressed at everything that's been achieved with the open source community. And to tie back on what I was saying at my first question, I really believe that open source is one of the first steps to change tech in the long run. So just spread the word.
Please do, audience, spread the word. Thank you so much for joining us today. This has been the Eclipse 2021 Con Keynote. Please go out and tell your stories about open source. We hope that you enjoy the conference, and everyone here, all of the panelists, definitely want to hear from you. If anything, struck you as, oh, cool, I want to get involved with that, you probably know where to find us. If not, Google will get us there. So thank you again so much, all three of you. It's been wonderful to host this panel, and take care.
IBM is open. IBM's cloud is open. What does it mean to be open? It means to be driving innovation in cloud technologies that underpin the power of cloud. Join our global community of developers and start building your skills today. developer.ibm.com